So stress is a physiological response connected to an external event or a stimulus. So in order for this cycle of stress to begin, there has to be a stressor, spelled Stressor. This is usually some kind of external circumstance, like a work deadline. You get a scary result from a medical test, a family crisis. And stress, as we just said, is physiological. So it might include things like a rapid heart rate, clammy palms, shallow breathing.
Welcome to another Good Solid Health podcast. I am your host, Reynaldo Mendoza, Robert Gauthier, my co-host, and we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Bruce Kaloski. I pronounced it right?
Yeah, correct. Right on. Good.
I'm fluent.
Yep.
I'm trilingual, so I'm able to to roll my K's, my S. I get around. So, hey, it's a pleasure to have you here. We're enjoying these conversations that we're having with doctors who are expert in a specific field, and you have your own specific field. And just for a quick introduction, can you tell us who you are in 30 seconds for everyone listening?
Okay, I am by trade a clinical hypnotherapist. I've been doing that for 43 years. My specialty, I have a number of different things that I do, but my specialty is what's called vocational and avocational self-improvement, which means that I deal with things that might fall into the realm of self-improvement: weight loss, smoking cessation, stress, anxiety, helping people overcome worry, which I believe are the topics of today's program, the sports improvement. I'll work with that too. So I work with a variety of different things within hypnotherapy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Question, Reynaldo, just Dr. Kaloski, what about for people who want to stop drinking?
Oh yeah, that comes in the a habit. It comes under a habit, just like smoking cessation is a habit. So can drinking be a habit. It's also addictive overtones, but it's also a habit.
Right.
But yeah, I work with alcohol addiction. Yeah.
So what I understand based on your expertise is that there's a saying, there's a quote that says mind over body. So basically, at the moment you control the mind, you're able to really change your mindset. You're able to control all these bad behavior. Let's say that some of us will have addiction, things like that, if I'm understanding right, and you're able to guide people through a different path.
Absolutely. It all begins in the mind. There's a saying that I have, particularly when I'm working with people with weight loss. Okay, this is a very popular one. I will say, before the weight can come off and stay off the body, it has to come off from between the ears, right? Your mind. Same with anything. Where you can make any change in your attitude, whether it be stress, anxiety, worry, you've got to make the change within that space between your two ears.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too, and I think it's something that we try to reflect on in our podcast too, on how all the effect, the power of the mind, and how it can drastically change on maybe exactly your behavior or how your body feels and things like that. And it's interesting the conversation we're going to have. There's a specific topic that we want to engage on for this episode. For today's topic, we're going to be discussing stress. So it's something that you mentioned that you have dealt with.
Exactly.
And tell me, how long have you been doing these practices?
How long have I been doing it? For as long as I've been doing hypnotherapy. That's over 40 years. But when we talk about stress, we also have to add in the other two of that holy triumvirate, I guess is what you'd call it. I call it the three emotional horsemen of the apocalypse. You have stress, anxiety, and worry.
Yeah.
The stress comes, we use those terms interchangeably. And there are similar components, which are often interrelated, because it's you might say that it falls on a spectrum, but they are entirely different states: stress, anxiety, and worry.
And out of the three, how do you differentiate each one of them? Because I find there might be levels to some of them. I would say that perhaps, on my belief, perhaps anxiety will be the worst case scenario out of those three. Is that accurate, or tell me about it?
Yeah, well, let's look at it. Okay. I guess the best way is for me to define those three, give them definitions. So stress is normally defined as a reaction to environmental changes or forces that exceed an individual's resources. You see, it's the body's non-specific response to any demand that you place on it, and it can be pleasant or unpleasant. See, stress isn't, we always think of it as being an unpleasant situation. Also, pleasant situations called.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
eustress, eustress. So stress is a physiological response connected to an external event or a stimulus. So in order for this cycle of stress to begin, there has to be a stressor, spelled stressor. This is usually some kind of external circumstance, like a work deadline. You get a scary result from a medical test, a family crisis. And stress, as we just said, is physiological. So it might include things like a rapid heart rate, clammy palms, shallow breathing. This is interesting. You see, in prehistoric times, back in the times of the caveman, stress was a natural response to a threat, like being stalked by a saber-toothed tiger, or maybe you're in danger of being stomped on by a woolly mammoth. But today, since we don't have saber-toothed tigers or woolly mammoths stalking us, it will still prompt a behavioral response. It fires up our what's called the limbic system. It releases adrenaline and cortisol, and that activates your brain and the body to deal with a specific threat. The body doesn't know that it's 10,000 years later. It reacts the same. We've changed very little in 10 to 20,000 years. Now, counter that with anxiety. Remember I said stress is a physiological response?
Okay,
right.
Yeah.
Anxiety can be defined as a feeling of worry, nervousness, unease. It's typically about an event or something with an uncertain outcome, something that's about to happen. And it arises out of a person's thoughts. So any given situation, when you talk about anxiety, it's the thought of potential danger, not the actual danger that produces those symptoms. And those symptoms can be, again, shortness of breath, pounding heart, sweating, fidgeting, rapid pulse or heartbeat, headache, stomach upset, we call the butterflies in our stomach, fainting, the feeling of when is the axe going to fall? There's an old expression. He has the sword of Damocles hanging over his head. If stress is a natural response to a threat, then anxiety is the same thing, except that there is no threat.
It's the mind.
Think of anxiety as being a response to a false alarm. Like stress, okay, the physiological, remember I said adrenaline is pumping, the cortisol is being produced, which is a stress hormone. The body is in a state of fight or flight. Palms are sweaty, but there is no saber-toothed tiger stalking you. There is no woolly mammoth getting ready to stomp you into the ground. Now the third, okay, go ahead. Were you gonna ask me a question?
Well, what I was gonna say is that, so basically stress has, it could be a positive and a negative aspect, as opposed to anxiety is just on the negative side. There's not like a positive.
Yeah, anxiety. Well, usually you can think about that, but better than that, think about it as being stress, being the physiological response, and anxiety, while it has physiological components, is more of an emotional feeling, an emotional state. Now you take those two and you put them together and you come up with worry. And worry, or chronic worry, okay, can be defined as mental distress or agitation that results from a concern, usually for something that's impending or you're anticipating it. It's characterized by repetitive, obsessive thoughts. Worry is actually the cognitive component of anxiety. And worry occurs only in the mind, not in the body, like stress and anxiety. It's what happens when the mind dwells on negative thoughts, uncertain outcomes, or things that might go wrong. So if you want to summarize everything, right? Worry happens in the mind, stress happens in the body, anxiety happens in the mind and the body.
And the mind. All right. So, all right, I see exactly where it is. And let's say having a panic attack, where would you classify it out of those three?
Anxiety, panic attacks are in the realm of the anxiety.
So it's like the mind and the body at the same time.
Yeah, the mind and the body are working together, the panic attacks. And of course, everything's made worse now by COVID-19.
In fact, yeah, exactly. So do you think that, because I know like it seems like in the past decade, mental health has become a more open discussion that we are able to engage nowadays. Even let's say at one point, let's say as a man back then, the stereotype was that a man does not isn't scared, doesn't cry, or isn't this or isn't that. And now today, like we are promoting more for men to be more open with their stress, with their anxiety. That it's okay, you know, that that you feel worry or anything like that. And I find that this has occurred in the past over 10 years approximately. And do you feel like now that it's more an open question, open discussion, things are getting better towards that in that field? And how has the pandemic come to weight on this these discussion?
Okay, two different things. First of all, you're talking about the change in men's roles. Now that, yeah, that has added to stress because they're very, well, shall we call it, cultural antecedents, depending upon where you, what culture you happen to be raised in. In some cultures, men are expected to be macho, and not in the Hispanic culture, right?
Hispanic, yeah, it's
the macho person. There, kindness and well, not so much kindness, but softness. The show of emotions is not expected in the Hispanic culture in that sense. Okay, so yeah, and that does lead to stress because we're getting a fella's getting two mixed signals, getting two signals from today's society, depending upon where they are. Now you asked about COVID and where COVID comes into play with today's stress. And that can be answered in one word: uncertainty. That is the biggest problem that COVID has placed upon us today in terms of stress, anxiety, and worry, is uncertainty. They've done some studies over the years. This was by the British Health Service. It showed that peptic ulcers increased by 50% among people living in the center of London during the Blitz, in the World War II Blitz, when bombings were irregular. They were irregular. You knew when the German rockets and the German planes were going to come over. Okay, so it was expected. So it was regular. Every night they knew there was going to blitz. There'd be a blitz, and it happened at a certain time. But when you went out into the cities, the outskirts of the city, where bombings were unpredictable, stomach ulcers increased by more than 6 times that much. Another example, they did studies with rats in the college in New Jersey, and they gave rats electrical shocks without any warning. And these rats developed gastric problems, complications, at a much greater rate than rats that were forewarned of the shock. They also did studies with college students, and they found out that they were most often sick most often following events in their lives that, in addition to being undesirable, left them uncertain as to the amount of control they had over them. So control is a big issue. And so what happens during the COVID? We feel totally not in control. There's an uncertainty of whether we, particularly in the beginning of COVID, whether you're going to make it through, whether it's going to decimate the entire planet, whether it's going to be a plague like the Black Plague. Very uncertain. This is what caused that particular, what made stress and anxiety and worry worse as a result of COVID.
Do you think that now that we advanced 1 year within this pandemic, that people are more certain on what's going on? We already somewhat know what kind of news is going to be delivered by our leaders and what is coming. So have people, let's say, have a better control over the stress of the pandemic as opposed to the beginning in this scenario that you're describing?
we're in a much better place now than we were at the beginning or shortly after. I say the beginning within the first 3 or 4 months. There is, we don't have that degree of unpredictability. We've developed vaccines, even though the various variants that we're being subject to, we have more confidence that these things can be handled. Now, in one aspect, in one way, you can say we should have had that confidence before because of other epidemics, smallpox, polio back in the 1940s and the 50s. But we didn't. This was something that was totally came out of the blue, totally unexpected.
Yeah, definitely. All right. And what could cause these experiences as stress, anxiety, and worry in these scenarios? What would the causes?
All right, so several different ways. Literally, hundreds of factors can cause. Let's look at stress. Let's look at them in order: stress, anxiety, and worry. Literally, hundreds of factors can cause stress. Noise, personal resentment, being tired, emotionally upset. Though the cause of a person's stress and the way that they handle it may seem very puzzling, it's always going to fall into certain categories. The number one is stress can be an inherited or a genetic response. You see, genes produce proteins, and proteins dictate how our body functions. So according to this theory, trauma, like from extreme stress, can leave a chemical mark on a person's genes and be passed from one generation to the next. So there are science. Now, this is very controversial. By no means is that genetic response accepted by a majority of scientists, but it does bear consideration. The one that seems to be most logical and most accepted, at least by people in my field, is stress as a learned response. And now this says that people have learned to behave in the same way as someone they admired or depended on.
I have
yeah, it's called modeling, by the way.
I have a theory that I'm living right now based on certain of what happened in this pandemic. Let me tell you about it. Tell me how this reflects on based on the genetic. So
yeah.
During this pandemic, me and my wife had a daughter. She gave birth in last May. So like during the pandemic, that's where everyone had to work from home, and I feel like here in Canada where we are, winters are kind of a bit rough, in which it's cold, it's icy outside, and it's not a place where I would recommend, let's say, for a pregnant woman to be around, especially if she's commuting. So due to COVID, to the pandemic, she worked from home the whole period of her pregnancy. She worked from home, and she didn't deal with waking up early, being stressed. Am I going to miss my bus? Am I going to make it on time? Am I going to slip over the ice? Am I going to be stuck together in public transportation? And all of these effects that she didn't have to deal with normally out of the pandemic, she ended up having a pregnancy that was kind of smooth. No stress. She woke up at usual time, woke up, did coffee, ate. And in return, we came to realize that the daughter that we have, she was born really quite calm, quite joyful. And my theory behind this is it because during the pregnancy, it was such a smooth ride for the baby that the baby just came out like really calm, as opposed to if it would have not been for the pandemic, the baby would have been more stressed only because the mother herself would have been stressed due to all the environment. Is this something that you can?
But now you're looking at two different things. You're looking at a mother's the one way of reacting being passed on to the baby. What this particular theory says that the mother has a gene that has a proclivity for stress. So the mother passes on the gene to the baby. So it might not be an appropriate example. However, what is appropriate is that next one of the learned response, the modeling. Now, if your wife is inherently a calm person, okay, things just roll off her back, or she doesn't get upset over things. chances are very good, according to this particular model of behavior, that your child will grow up in that way. Particularly, like still in today's society, the mother is mainly involved with bringing up the baby, the child, and the child is going to be around the mother more.
Yeah.
So that would be a perfect example of stress as a learned response. If your child grows up to be a laid-back individual, and your wife is a laid-back individual, they learned that the child learned behavior from the mother.
All right, interesting. So, all right, so let's talk about you now, your expertise. So, how do you help people overcome these feelings, these stress? What are within your practices when people come see you? Hey, Dr. Bruce, I need help.
Okay, as a hypnotherapist, that's two ways that I do. The guiding principle behind hypnosis is that it allows us to bypass the conscious part of the mind. That's the part that we reason with during the day. We communicate, and it allows us to directly communicate with the subconscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind is where our habits, behaviors, belief systems, attitudes are formed. You know, the mind's a lot like a computer. And just as you can program a computer, so can we program the mind. One big difference. The mind can choose to accept or reject the programming. Naturally, we want it to accept it. No one's going to come to me and says, no, I don't want to accept your help. I don't want to accept it. They're not going to pay me not to accept it. So they are. And that's why, so in order to help it along the way, with hypnosis or hypnotherapy, we can do a number of things. And one of the most powerful things we have at our disposal is something called guided imagery. And guided imagery is based on three very powerful premises. Number one, what the mind can conceive and believe, it will also achieve. Two, for anything can be accomplished physically, you've got to do it mentally. Three, the human central nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real or a vividly imagined experience. Reacts the same in either way. Give you an example. Let's say you go to the movies. You watch TV about a little boy and a dog. Little doggy dies at the end of the movie. Little boy starts crying. This family in the movie starts crying. In most cases, what do you do when you're watching that? You start to feel sad. You start to cry. But if you think about it, what are you crying about? You know the dog didn't die. Good God, it's a movie. After filming, that dog got in his limousine, went home, and had his dinner, his dog food. It's pure illusion. It's total delusion. But for a moment, we allow it to be real. So we have this response occurs in the absence of analytical or reflective thought. You're sitting there watching the movie. You're not thinking that it's not real. You're thinking that is real. Last night, my wife and I sat here and watched the James Bond movie. Man, my heart was racing. I knew that it was a Sean Connery James Bond. I knew that they weren't really out to kill Sean Connery or James Bond, but it felt like it was, and I got caught up in the movie. So we're seeing the imagination at work. What the mind conceives, the body tends to achieve. Now, we can apply that same principle to overcoming stress, anxiety, worry. So we're looking at it as a conditioned response. In other words, you weren't born with this behavior. You learned it. You learned to be stressed in this situation. You learned to be anxious. You learned to worry. So with hypnosis, we replace those negative thoughts and feelings with the responses that you want. And what do you want? How do you want to respond? You want to respond with calmness, confidence, control, positiveness. So you get a new perspective on those attitudes, thoughts, people, situations that cause those negative responses. So you see, hypnosis works on a subconscious level. But in my method of hypnosis, and I take a different approach, and I have for many, many years, and I am of the belief that habits are formed in both the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. To treat one area while neglecting the other is only doing half the job. You're going to have a much better success rate if you take both areas into consideration. So while I'm using hypnosis to help a person from on the subconscious level, I also like to give these people things, tell them things that they can do on a conscious level. There are things that you can do on the conscious level to help yourself overcome stress, anxiety, and worry.
And can hypnosis cure, let's say, any type of personality trait or character that has been anchored since birth into a person and actually change someone that was conditioned to think or see things a certain way?
In other words, take a person who's inherently negative and turn them into a positive person. Yes, it can. Psychotherapy can do that too. But here's the advantage of hypnosis. Because we're dealing with the subconscious mind, it takes less time to do if the person is committed and they want to change. Okay, that's a caveat. I have to say that.
So that's the main thing.
You can't make a person change.
You can't force someone
right.
to do
if
it.
If they want to change, it can be done quicker than by just using psychotherapy. And it can be done even quicker if you use both hypnosis and give them some conscious things to do, or things to do on a conscious level. So I like to give a person things that they can take home and do on their own when these particular situations strike. We're talking about stress, anxiety, and worry.
I have a question. This is like a big topic that, and I don't want to get too into this topic, but let's talk about racism in the personality character level. So racism is not something that you are born with, but it's something that someone has been taught. So as an adult, someone that has been raised that to have prejudice towards, let's say, a certain kind of people, if this can you actually change the mind of this type of mindset of a person?
If that person is open to change,
is willing,
and they're willing and want to change, it'll accelerate the change. Yes. So the answer is yes. It will accelerate the change. Like with anything, where by counseling alone may take months, maybe with hypnotherapy we can cut it down to weeks or days, depending upon what the problem is.
Interesting. Just a curiosity how much you can shape the mind of someone that's just like, because some people are just like stubborn. Seems like you cannot change them whatsoever. But what I'm understanding is that, yeah, there might be a way as long as a person has a willpower to undergo these procedures.
So I'm going to interject here. So somebody who's in the KKK, there's nothing you can do to change their mind.
Probably not. If they're not willing to change, you're never going to change their mind. They're set in their particular ways. Those kind of people are not they're capable. They choose not to apply logic. Just put it that way. They choose not to apply logic.
Or they believe that their logic is the right one.
Yeah. Their inherent faulty logic is the correct one. But if you present them with the scientific facts, I mean, the person in the KKK honestly believes that the white race is inherently superior to the black race, right? Inherently genetically superior. But it's been shown time and time again that is not.
No, it's not, exactly.
Yeah, we're all equal at the end of the day.
So they will circumvent the facts and use whatever data they want to use.
Exactly. They're selective in their data. Yeah, very selective.
Yeah, no, all right. And well, one thing too, like lastly, just you've mentioned that hypnosis, it's something that you work on a subconscious level. However, what can a person do on a conscious level, let's say to in the same practices to help themselves?
All right, again, let's look at those three of them. I'll give anybody who's listening some pointers. As far as stress is concerned, you want to recognize your own particular stress signals and then take some positive steps. These signals are not often as clear as you might like them to be, but they can be recognized if you keep a close watch on them. All those things that we talked about, headaches, insomnia, fatigue, irritability. When you're experiencing those things and you know that there's not a medical condition right now, then you can very well assume that it's probably stress that is causing those things. Another thing, as far as stress is concerned, exercise can go a long way toward relieving stress, and they've done studies on this. And studies show that the people who engage in regular exercise, they do tend to enjoy better health, sleep better, generally better able to cope with the stress of everyday living. And most importantly, they have elevated immune systems. But you know, one of the ones that I like, and one of the easiest things to use, is the power of humor. Now, it's been said, it's an old saying, laughter is the best medicine. Laughter can be a way for people in intolerable, terrible situations to cope or deal with stress. Now, although it's very unscientific, it's been found to give much relief to stress sufferers. Now, the physiological explanation for that is that laughter triggers the brain to release catecholamine hormones. And this in turn causes the release of endorphins. And endorphins are the body's natural mood elevator. It may also be that laughter draws the attention away from the particular situation you're in, the negative situation, and it enables the person to function in normal everyday tasks. So what a person can do, go out of your way to watch a funny movie, watch a funny TV show. Think, when you're in a stressful situation, think about something in your life that was hilariously funny. And play that over in your mind. Even if you look and feel like an idiot laughing out loud, well, everyone around you, don't worry about it. You're the one who's undergoing the stress, not them, even if it looks silly or foolish. So the lesson to be learned here, life goes on, lighten up.
Yeah.
Anxiety, so remember we said anxiety is a cognitive element, which is worry, and a physiological element, which is stress. So what you can do, a couple of things. There's a lot of things, I'm just going to give you a couple. One is called thought stopping. That is a strategy that interrupts catastrophic thinking to enable our minds to a few moments of clarity to think through the anxiety. So a couple of things you can do is something called scattered counting. Now, to do this, you count up or you count down, count up to 10 or down to 10 to 0. That's a great way to handle anxiety. Because the process is so automatic. While we're counting chronologically, our minds still have the capacity to think about whatever is causing our anxiety. Better technique is the scattered counting. Okay, that start with any number and then jump around. You know, you might do a 14, 89, 22, 37, 57. It takes more concentration to come up with the next number when you have to think about what it'll be. And this helps take your mind off of the thoughts that are troubling you. Verbal interruption, that works for a lot of people. Verbal interruption means you stop thoughts dead in their tracks with a verbal interruption. You can literally talk out loud to yourself if you feel comfortable doing that, or you can do it internally in your head. So what you can do is just shout out loud or in your head, stop, or enough, not now. You know, when the anxiety begins to take over. And this forces you to take a pause. And you can do that as many times as you want to calm your mind.
I've seen some example of, let's say, those ones, let's say, shouting to yourself, stop. Does it help to do it in front of a mirror as a person, looking at yourself and saying stop? Yeah, that'll help, but you're not always in front of a mirror. You could be out and about. So if you can do it in front of, you don't have to do it in front of a mirror. It might add something to it, but if you're out and about and just walking down the street, if you get a panic attack, then use that. And so that's also physiologically, okay, that helps you psychologically. Physiologically, you want to look at doing relaxation techniques, yoga, meditation, self-hypnosis. And it actually
Self-hypnosis or meditation has been shown to actually change the structure of the brain. It strengthens your ability to combat those strong emotions. As far as worry is concerned, analyze the situation, the situation you're worried about. Get the facts and then analyze it in a partial, objective way and write it down. Physically, write it down. And after you've carefully considered all the facts, come to a decision. If you decide that there's something you can do about it, then act. Act now, act forcibly, and then forget about it. Dismiss any anxiety, any worry about the outcome from you. Don't even stop to consider. Don't even stop to hesitate or go back over your tracks. Just go ahead and do it. And here's another good one. Make it financial. Decide just how much your troubles are worth and refuse to pay any more. There was a famous writer years ago who wrote a book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. His name was Dale Carnegie, and he's actually the father of the self-improvement movement in the United States. So, and he wrote, I think he said, whenever we're tempted to throw good money after bad in terms of human living, and by money, he's likening that to worry. He says, let's stop and we'll ask ourselves these three questions. How much does this thing I'm worrying about really matter to me? Number two, at what point am I going to put a stop loss order on this worry and forget about it? And number three, exactly how much am I willing to pay for this? And have I already paid more than it's worth? And one of the best things to do for worry is look at the law of averages. Okay. Logically rationalize it. Logically rationalize the actual possibility or odds of what you're afraid of actually coming to pass. Think about this, Ray. Stop and think. How many bad things have really happened to you in your lifetime? How often has your house been broken into? How many times have you been mugged? How many times has your house caught fire? How many times have you been in a plane that crashed? How many times have you been fired from a job? Next, think about all the time that you've wasted worrying about these bad things. When you stop to think about it, it's really ridiculous to worry ourselves to death over imaginary fears that when we could be using the time to enrich our lives and find solutions. So if I had to sum it all up, stress, anxiety, and worry. The most important thing to keep in mind that it's not the circumstances of fortune or misfortune that makes us happy or miserable. It's the attitude that we take towards those things. I think we'd all be well advised to take a tip from the British Army. Now, the British Army had one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen outside of the Roman Empire. And they had the British Isles had that. But the British Army had a particularly great attitude towards turning a negative into a positive. All those campaigns that they took part in throughout their entire empire, that they never once retreated. Instead, they advanced to the rear. Think about the difference. There's a retreat and an advance to the rear. So we can choose to sink into despondency or despair, or we can use these troubles, these misfortunes as a learning process and a stepping stone to eventual success. You always remember this. Every time a door closes, another one opens.
Definitely. I like that. That's a good way to finalize this. And finally, let's say, I would say, how would you combine, let's say, how do you see combine? Because considering us here at the Good Solid Health podcast, we often talk about how we can boost and support our immune system through natural supplement. And how do you see the combination of, let's say, these practices they just described, along with using natural supplement, to...
nutrition is a very, very big part of that, because nutrition attacks the problem on the physiological level. And you guys know a lot more about that than I do. I know with Robert's fantastic products that he's created. So nutrition is indeed a very important part of that. Because when you have poor nutrition, it's just so easy to sink into despair, to sink into worry, sink stress. The B vitamins are known as the anti-stress vitamins. Yeah, I am totally in step with what you're doing there.
Well, perfect. That sounds amazing. But hey, I find that this conversation could have gone so long.
There's so much more.
I have so much more to ask you,
Yeah.
but you know what? I think we covered a good portion of what is stress, anxiety, and worry.
Yeah.
I've learned myself a lot, and it was great listening to you. And definitely, we need to have you back again into our show because
I'd love to. I'm looking forward to it.
Because I find like there's so much to develop with this topic.
Yes, there's a lot.
If I may, Dr. Bruce, can you do a practice what you do best on video conferencing?
Absolutely, online. As a matter of fact, a lot of therapists, hypnotherapists, even psychotherapists, had to close their offices during with the advent of the COVID-19. They just couldn't afford to keep them. No, the people weren't coming out, so they experimented with doing it online. And guess what? It's just as effective. At least what I do is just as effective, because the only tool I have at my disposal are my words and my voice. I'm not a chiropractor. I don't do hands-on adjustments. So whatever I do in person, face-to-face, I can do online. I can do over the phone.
All right. So
I used to do phone work 30 years ago before it was even popular, because I was having people being referred to me from the other side of the country, and they couldn't travel. They couldn't travel to see me, or it was too expensive. So I started working over the phone. And now with the advent of computers, with Zoom, with Facebook Messenger, Skype, it's so easy.
all right.
Matter of fact, it can be more effective. Think about this. From this standpoint, is that you feel more relaxed, more at ease, less uptight when you're at home, in your own safe environment.
In your right, safe environment.
Exactly.
The next logical question is, how do people get in touch with you?
Well, you can get in touch with me through my website, which is Dr. Kaloski, and that's DrKaloski, or my email rather, DrKaloski@gmail.com. Let me say it one more time. DrKaloski@gmail.com.
Perfect. Now, for the benefit of the audience that might, what is the length of time of a average session?
Average session is about 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay, so that's what people have to block in their calendar.
They should put aside for that. Yeah. I begin all my programs with a clinical interview and evaluation, where I speak to the client and find out exactly what they want to accomplish and why they want to accomplish. What's the motivation for the change they want to make? I explain how hypnosis will help them. And then in the second session is we begin the actual hypnotherapy.
Cool. All right.
That's amazing. And how many sessions do you need in order to feel like 10?
No, that's the hypnotherapy is a short-term therapy technique. 4 to 6 sessions are generally all you need, except for stop smoking. Stop smoking is 2 sessions. I found that the less sessions I do for smoking cessation, the more effective it is. Because the longer you go, the more you're giving them permission to smoke. So stop smoking is 2 sessions. Everything else is generally 4 to 6 sessions.
All right. So then, as a prelude to the next discussion, we're going to have weight loss. How long does it take?
Again, can be 4 to 6 sessions. Might be dependent upon how much they need to lose. If I have a person that's like 100 or more pounds overweight, then I'm going to probably end towards the higher end of that spectrum. But I don't want them to become dependent upon me. I teach them, I give them tools that they can use on their own to follow up. I record all of my sessions too. I give them audio recordings of the session, MP3s.
And last question, what's the interval between sessions?
A week apart.
So you're talking about taking on someone on a weekly basis
Exactly.
till he gets the results.
Exactly. That's it.
He or she, right? Cool. All right.
Great.
Hey.
That's
So,
amazing.
Reynaldo, if
That's
you
amazing,
wanna-
Dr. Bruce.
Okay, this was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. So thank you again. And for everyone who wants to reach you, website, email, social media,
Absolutely.
and definitely we'll have you once again to continue the
They can
discussion.
find me on Facebook too. Everybody's on Facebook. Let's face it. Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you very
guys.
much.
Nice talking.
Appreciate.
Take
Enjoy
care.
your time.
Stay safe.
This pandemic, we have finally realized how important our body's immunity is. But do you know the cells in your body are constantly exposed to such harmful threats daily? Bacteria, viruses, parasites, EMF radiations all interact with these cells and try to disable their day-to-day functionalities. The GSH compound binds itself to it, prevents its replication, and renders it water-soluble. It neutralizes the effects of EMF radiations by conjugating and changing their structure, which enables detoxification at an intracellular level. Want to know more? Visit us at www.simcorp.ca today.